Can you believe it's the final week of the Decades of Dread? And this will be my last entry into the series. Hello, welcome to my channel, Another Bibliophile Reads. My name is Greg. I am co-host for Horror Mayhem 2025. It was an event created 3 years ago by Scott and Peggy Bryant to celebrate reading short works of horror, novels under 250 pages, or short stories. And I have been participating in these 3 years. Now, unfortunately, we did lose Scott last year, but his wife Becky is continuing this event, and I'm so happy to be a co-host. I will list all my other fabulous co-hosts in the description of this video because we're all reading short horror works, and you will find a vast array of different styles and preferences of what we like about horror. So go check them out. Now, in this Decades of Dread project, it is the idea to read stories across the decades. I committed myself to read a short story beginning in 1850 and working through every decade up to the 2020s, and I have completed this project. It's really a rather amazing project, in my mind, that the horror stories that I started off with in the mid-19th century were ghost stories written by Victorian women. They are so different from the stories that I'll be talking about today. And in the middle of those decades, you will find yet even different types of horror stories. Every generation, it seems, needs to reinterpret what we think about horror. The Victorian age was all concerned about ghosts, and now we're concerned about many different things. So go ahead and read your horror stories from every decade possible if you can. I really enjoyed my time with Horror Mayhem 2025. Now, I will talk about the stories that I read this week. This is a vlog entry style because basically I read a short story and then recorded a video about it. In some cases, I skipped a day and recorded 2 stories in a day, but that's okay too. So these are the stories that I read from 1990 to the 2020s. I am going to cheat just a little bit. When I originally conceived of my Decades of Dread storyline, I did not own this anthology. Michael K. Vaughan's Sorcerer Roger made me buy this book. This is a very thick 1,000-page anthology of some of the greatest horror stories ever written. And I had to get it. But I also had to read at least one story from this anthology since I did go ahead and buy it. So I picked it up, and the first story in this anthology was The Reach by Stephen King, originally published in 1981. And I decided, well, I just finished the 1980s. Why not add one more story and just add it on to this week? Well, anyway, this is a story set in Maine on an island. It's called Goat Island. Now, in real life, there are many tiny islands off the coast of Maine, and they usually have very sparse populations. But most of those people decide to go to the mainland every now and then. Although Stephen King had a brother who mentioned that there was an island with some sort of animal name where there was a woman, an elderly woman, who had never been to the mainland because she believed that her life on the island had everything that she needed. Now, one of the things about Maine winters is they get very cold, and sometimes the ocean between the mainland and the island freezes over, and that is called the Reach, or actually the Reach is the space between the mainland and the island, and sometimes the Reach freezes over, although it's not very trustworthy. Some of the islands decide to take their snowshoes or their snowmobiles and head out to the mainland for a beer or two. And some of them don't make it back alive. So you have this woman on an island who's never been to the mainland, and she's thinking about her people who have died on the Reach. So this is kind of a ghost story. Now, the editor of this anthology, David G. Hartwell, says The Reach is Stephen King's best story. I think that's a bit of an exaggeration, though it does make a very good ghost story. It was originally titled The Reach by Stephen King, but when it was published, they made him change it to Do the Dead Sing. When he republished it in his anthology, Skeleton Crew, he said, let's go back to the original title, The Reach. So, read this story. It's a good one. Grimescribe, His Lives and Works by Thomas Ligotti, originally published in 1991. Thomas Ligotti is a very curious and interesting horror writer. He has, for the most part, a very dense and scholarly style. You have to be very cautious when reading his stories because he packs a lot on to the page. Now, this story that I read was called The Last Feast of Harlequin. It is about a college professor. His specialty is clowns, and he lives up in New England. And one day, he hears about a town in New England that celebrates a feast, a Fool's Day of clowns, right around the winter solstice and Christmas. He dismisses it at first until he passes through this town on just happenstance. And yes, indeed, there is a feast at the end of the year for Harlequins. And he also notices that one of his old college professors that disappeared about 20 years ago, or should we say, faded into obscurity, is living in this town, and his old college professor wrote an essay about these fools, these Harlequins and clowns, called The Last Feast of Harlequin. So, of course, this college professor has to go visit this town around the time of this feast. And this college professor also dresses up as a clown himself. And when he notices that there are these fools, these clowns, dressing up and going somewhere strange, he, of course, disguises himself as one of them, dressed as a clown, to see what they are worshiping. Now, if you read Thomas Ligotti, as I said, his style is very dense and complicated, but the stories are very rewarding and worth reading. In Layman's Terms, a tribute anthology of stories to Richard Laymon. Richard Laymon was a very famous horror author. This anthology is edited by Kelly Laymon, his daughter, Steve Gerlach, a horror thriller writer from Australia, and Richard Chizmar, the publisher of Cemetery Dance magazine. And this has a lot of different horror authors writing short stories in the tradition of Richard Laymon, and there are also a lot of remembrances, authors who were drinking buddies with Dick Laymon or just colleagues. There is Jack Ketchum and many other authors in here. This is a rather hard to find anthology nowadays. I remember ordering it online when it was in pre-publication. This anthology does collect some of Richard Laymon's short stories, and since I am now on the aughts, I read Hiccup on Highway 1 by Richard Laymon, originally published in 2001. Now, in this short story, there is a businessman who was on a road trip. He is driving back to his home in San Francisco along California's Highway 1. That is a very windy and twisty road along the coast of the Pacific Ocean. And this businessman picks up a female hitchhiker just for fun. But he's been driving a long time, and he asks the hitchhiker, "Are you a good driver?" And she says, "Yep, the best." And so he decides to let this hitchhiker take a spell at driving. Well, she said she was the best driver, but she has this little problem of hitting people along the side of the road and not stopping. So, Richard Laymon. He's not as sexist as he can be in his novels, but this is a funny story. It's not really gruesome or horrifying because it's just so ridiculous, but I liked it. For the 2010s, I decided to read the entry from Edward Lee, the great gruesome splatterpunk author. He decided that he thought a humorous story would be very fitting for this anthology. And here is the first line of the story. It tastes kind of like pork, if you cook it right. Low heat in the oven, or else it dries out. Pan frying depends on what you're cooking. Like with venison, you have to add a little light oil, or you'll wind up with a chop that's sinewy. And when you're broiling, 6-7 inches from the element at least, or any closer and the fat all drains. I'm going to give you 3 guesses about what's being cooked in this paragraph, or opening paragraph. The first 2 don't count. And if you guess right, you'll be surprised at the end because your guess is right. But Edward Lee does something special with this story because it takes it in a really strange direction. And I absolutely adored the end of this short story because it was humorous and it was gruesome and it just made me chuckle. Look at Our Holes, an anthology of voids and orifices, edited by Juan Valencia, with concept by Valerie Complex. This is an anthology that Juan put together for the Cucapan people. They are Native Americans based near Calexico, California. And he did this just to raise money for them, to support them, because like many Native American communities, they are struggling with hard times and having their culture slowly eradicated. Maybe that's a little too strong. Maybe it's not. But since Juan is an internet friend, I decided I would go ahead and purchase this anthology. It is currently available in paperback and Kindle at Amazon. I'm not sure if it's available elsewhere. But this is a collection of bizarre comics, poems, and short stories. They are horror-ish, I guess, but they're also just strange stories. And I've read about the first 6. And the one that I am going to talk about for my Decades of Dread is Ink and Void by M.A.J. You will know M.A.J. better as MJ at Reading This Life. She is also a friend. And in this story, there is a woman with no family other than her tattoo artist. Her name is Charlie, and the tattoo artist is named Jay. And Jay has some very unique ideas about what can be done with tattoos. And he slowly starts covering Charlie's body with some mystical tattoos. Not your normal images that you would find on a lot of bodies. Mystical images that can import power to the person who was wearing them. It is my favorite story that I've read so far. It's a very strange story, but it is yet empowering in its own way, and I encourage everyone to pick up this anthology. Okay, that is my wrap up for Horror Mayhem 2025 Decades of Dread. I hope everyone watching these videos, either mine or my other co-hosts, have really enjoyed the Horror Mayhem for this year. I know I did. And I'm so looking forward to 2026. And I'm going to put on my thinking cap. What can we do different next year? I'm really eager to find out. Thank you for watching and keep on reading horror.